goes away, but we see to do item works 3 times. Now the reason this is happening is because, but so now that we've done that, let's say, type of, and say to do, saying right in the class, we're going to create an input property. And the way that we do that is by something called input. So like this, we actually have, and when you pass in some component, it cannot bind to do since now, if I save this to this and say duration or each to do, and the way that we do that is by adding some brackets and say to do equals to do. So we're basically passing in like a property to this app to do item, which is each one of these. Now, if I save this, we're going to get an error down here that says cannot bind to do since it's not a known property of the to do item component. So let's go to the TS file, the to do item component. And when you pass in something the way that we just did, like this, we actually have to label it as an input. So in the to do item, I'm going to bring in up here from Angular Core something called input. And down here, right in the class, we're going to create an input property. And the way that we do that is by saying at input and say to do, and we're actually going to give it a type of to do, just like we did with just like we did in the to do's component. Okay, and we brought that in right here. So now that we've done that, let's save. Now the error goes away, but we see to do item works 3 times. Now the reason this is happening is because we're passing in these 3 to-dos. Okay, we're passing them into the to-do item component. However, the to-do item component, if we look at the HTML, make this a little bigger. If we look at the HTML, it's just a paragraph that says to-do item works. So I could go ahead and change this to to-do.title. Put some spaces here and save, and now we can see each to-do item. All right, now there's a couple things that I want to add to this. Actually, you know what? First thing, before I get to that, I want to add some base CSS, meaning CSS that I want to apply to the whole site, or the whole app. So I'm going to go to the styles.css, and I'm actually going to just paste this stuff in. It's very simple. It's just basically a reset to reset the margin and padding, Arial font, link color, and a button class for the add form or the add to do button. So I'm going to save that. Okay, just change the style up a little bit. And then back in our to do item component HTML, we're going to just add a checkbox, and we will also want a delete button. So, and I'm going to wrap this in a div. So right here, let's put a div, and then let's bring this up. Because you can't do this in your template. You can't have 2 root items like this. Everything has to be wrapped in one. Okay, and then in the paragraph, let's put an input. Actually, I want to do input with the type of checkbox, and we don't need a name and ID. And underneath that to-do title, let's put a button, and I'm going to give this button a class of del, and just put an X. Okay, so we'll save that. Now I want some styling that just pertains to this component, so we'll go to our to-do item component CSS. Some styling that just pertains to this component, so we'll go to our to-do item component CSS, and I'm actually going to just paste this in real quick and save. Now the The del class is applied to the buttons here, as you can see. However, the to do and the is complete, we haven't used those yet. Now, the is complete, I only want this line through if the completed is true. Okay, remember, if we look at our to-dos, we have completed, which is either true or false. We only want that style to be applied or that class to be applied if that completed is true. So the way that we're going to do this is, let's close that up, is we're going to use something called the ng classes directive. So I'm going to go to this div here, and I'm going to put brackets and say ng classes, and we can set this to a method in our class, which I'm going to call set classes. Okay, so we'll save that. We're going to get an error because there is no set classes yet. So let's go to our TypeScript file for this component. And inside here, we're going to create our set classes. So I'm going to go down below here. We'll say set dynamic classes. So set classes, I'm going to create a variable called classes. And the way that this works is we set a class name like to do, and then we set a condition. Now, the to do class I always want to get added, so I'm going to just say true. However, the is completed class, and since it has a hyphen, I have to put it in quotes, or we'll get an error. But the is completed class, I only want this to be in effect if it's completed. So we'll say this dot to do dot completed. And this dot to do pertains to the to do that's being passed in from the input, okay, or from the prop. And then finally, we just need to return classes. All right, now I'll save this. And let's see, can't bind ng classes since it isn't a known property. What did I do wrong here? I said classes. It's not ng classes. It's ng class. Okay. So now we have our to-do class, which gives this gray background. We should, however, have of our class. Wrong here. I said classes. It's not ng classes. It's ng class. Okay. So now we have our to-do class, which gives this gray background. We should, however, have a line through this one because it's true, right? Yeah, I set completed to true. Let me just check that out again. So to do and then is completed should be set to this dot to do completed. I'm not really sure why that's not working. Oh, it is complete, right? Yeah, there we go. Because in the CSS file, the style is complete, not is completed. And now you can see that there's a line through the one that is true. Now, if I go back to my data, which right now resides in the to-dos component, and I set the first one to true and save, you'll see that that gets a line through it. All right, so we have dynamic class binding going on. Now, the next thing I want to do is show you about events. And what these events do, it's going to change because ultimately we're going to be dealing with a service. But just to show you how to create an event, let's go to our to-do item component HTML, and let's add an event to this input into this delete button. So I want to change event on the checkbox. And the way that we add an event in Angular is with parentheses, the type of event, which is change, and then we set it to a method. So I'm going to call this on toggle. And I'm going to pass in the to do, which we have access to. Okay, and then for the button, let's set this to click. And when we click, we want to call on delete and pass in the to do. Okay, and then we can go into the TypeScript file and we can create those methods. Delete and pass in the to do. Okay. Okay, and then we can go into the type script file, and we can create those methods. So we'll say on toggle. Oops. Actually, I don't want to comment. Let's say on toggle. Takes in the to do. And let's console.log. And I'll just say toggle. All right, and then let's go ahead and copy this down. And let's call this one on delete. And we'll console log delete, just to make sure that these work. So if I check a box here down at the bottom here in the console, you see toggle. If I click delete, you see delete. Okay, so it's calling these methods. Now, for the toggle, I can simply take the to-do dot completed and set it to whatever it's not. So if it's true, set it to false. If it's false, set it to true. And I can do that by just saying to-do dot completed. So I save this and I check this, you'll see that it will toggle the completed state. Now this is only in the UI. Ultimately, I want to change the value on the server. So our JSON placeholder to-dos right here, I want to be able to change these. So that's going to happen using the HTTP module. All right, so I want to move all my data to a service instead of having it right in the to-dos component, which is right here. Move all my data to a service. I'll and let's call, and when we click, we want to call on delete and pass in the to do. Okay, and then we can go into the TypeScript file and we can create those methods. So we'll say on toggle. Oops, actually I don't want to comment. Let's say on toggle. Takes in the to do. And let's console.log. And I'll just say toggle. All right, and then And let's go ahead and copy this down, and let's call this one on delete, and we'll console log delete, just to make sure that these work. So if I check a box here down at the bottom here in the console, you see toggle. If I click delete, you see delete. Okay, so it's calling these methods. Now, for the toggle, I can simply take the to-do dot completed and set it to whatever it's not. So if it's true, set it to false. If it's false, set it to true. And I can do that by just saying to-do dot completed. So I save this, and I check this. You'll see that it will toggle the completed state. Now, this is only in the UI. Ultimately, I want to change the value on the server. So our JSON placeholder to-dos right here, I want to be able to change these. So that's going to happen using the HTTP module. All right, so I want to move all my data to a service. Instead of having it right in the to-dos component, which is right here in the ng on init, I want to move it to a service. So I'm going to open up my terminals. I'm going to open up my terminal here. And let's clear this up, and we'll do ng, g for generate, s for service. And I want to go in the services folder and create a to-do service. So I'm just going to say to-do. All right, so we'll go ahead and run that. And as you can see, it's created a services folder. And if we look at to-do service.ts, we import this injectable. What this does is it allows us to inject it into a constructor and a component. All right, and then other than that, it's just a simple class with a constructor. Now, I want to move my data here. So I'm going to, for now, just hard code it in the service before we deal with the HTTP module. So I'm going to say, get to-dos. And for now, let's just return an array of to-dos. So I'm going to just move them from the to-dos component, which is right here. So I'll just grab this whole array. Let's grab that. And for now, I'll just get rid of this.